It's another Thunder Thursday on News OK Live. I'm Mike Sherman, sports editor of the Oklahoman, joined by our two columnists from our newsroom. Just below me at 9000 North Broadway, columnist Jenny Carlson. From his hotel room, somewhere near the Los Angeles International Airport, columnist Barry Trammell. Barry, Darnell Mayberry, and Anthony Slater are in Los Angeles to cover Game 6 of the NBA Western Conference semifinals between the Thunder and the Los Angeles Clippers. But this is Thunder Thursday, and we're talking about it. Of course, Thunder Thursdays are brought to you by our good friends at Wheeler Chevrolet. Take that drive down I-40. Save yourself some time and your money. Barry, Doc Rivers was fined $25,000 for his rant after Game 5. What has gotten into Doc, and has it become a distraction for the Clippers?
Oh, no, I don't think so. I don't really believe in this distraction stuff. Everybody talks about it, but I don't much believe in it. I mean, these guys go out and do all kinds of things on their own time anyway. So, I mean, when it's time to play, they play. I mean, the Clippers have played well and hard, really, for 12 games in the playoffs and haven't always played, the best game or the game they want to play. But I think it's just one more in a long line of stuff. And I think in some ways it might be a confidence boost for the Clippers, with Doc saying, hey, this game, you guys didn't really lose that game. They took it from you, even if it's not true.
Let me ask a better question, Jenny. Was it a distraction in the middle of a monumental collapse in Game 5?
Well, don't you think it had to be? I mean, I think Doc Rivers got people talking about him, got people talking about the call, no call, the replays, all that sort of thing, when there could have been lots of people talking about what happened to Chris Paul. 2 costly turnovers, a costly foul. It wasn't just that. I mean, obviously some other stuff happened to get to the point where those mistakes by Chris Paul ultimately were part of the game, but I think it did sort of take some of the pressure off of Chris Paul and his teammates. For them to lose that game, it was obviously disappointing. Every bit as disappointing as what the Thunder did 2 days before, but you didn't hear a lot of people talking about that because of what Doc Rivers did. So I think it was a little bit of a distraction. Was it meant that way? I have no idea, but that's how it played out.
It's a great point Jenny makes. Chris Paul came into the post-game press conference as disconsolate as anybody you've ever seen after a loss. Barry, you wrote about it today. But in the midst of the game, and this is what Bill Plaschke wrote about today for the Los Angeles Times, Doc Rivers literally lost his mind screaming about that call. And then Chris Paul goes out and fouls Russell Westbrook 30 feet from the basket, giving him a chance for 3 free throws to put the Thunder ahead. And then the last play of the game, Chris Paul goes to the basket. Didn't really look like the Thunder had that the Clippers had much of a plan there for a last-ditch effort. Did Doc Rivers himself get distracted by this call, Barry?
Well, he says he did. He says he had a play drawn up already and everything was kosher. But I think a lot of times, teams can we think of distractions as a mental thing. I think this was more of an emotional hit that the Clippers took in game, where they had the game apparently won. We saw that with the Thunder in Game 4, way ahead, lose the lead, and then the pretty shaky in the last minute or two. And the Clippers were certainly shaky. I think they were it was part the call, but it was also part just the comeback. I mean, they just took a massive hit. They were on the verge of taking control of this series, and here comes the Thunder with this great comeback. It was like a blow to the heart, and sometimes that can be very difficult to recover from.
Jenny, you and I were talking about this in the office a little bit about an hour ago, but it's about the coaches and the perception of the coaches. Here we have 2 straight games, blown fourth quarters. Scott Brooks roasted for blowing Game 4, roasted nationally. There's local calls again about his stagnant offense, about his unimaginative approach late in the game, about his approach that really leads to hero ball. He got it after Game 5 too. Yet here's Doc Rivers, beloved coach with a ring on his finger, and his team blows a 13-point lead in the last 4 minutes, 7 in the last 49 seconds. And where's the criticism of Doc Rivers? Is there a double standard as how we look at these two coaches?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you have to at least say there is to some degree. I mean, and not only are we talking about the way that the Clippers blew the end of Game 5, but if you look at the 3 previous games to that, for 2 3/4 of those games, the Clippers were getting outplayed and outplayed badly. The Thunder was clearly the better team in 2, 3, and a vast majority of Game 4. So Doc Rivers was not, I mean, his team didn't seem to be improving game to game, making adjustments that would make you think they were, going to be able to hang with the Thunder in a 7-game series. And yeah, I mean, I think that has to be at least in part attributed to sort of the well that he's built up over the years. Win a championship, be perceived as a good guy, good coach. I think that has to be part of it. And Scott Brooks doesn't have the championship. He doesn't have as deep a well. Has become a little bit like Russell Westbrook in getting criticism. Now, does he deserve some of it, as Russell Westbrook does? Absolutely. But I think sometimes the criticism that gets heaped on Scott Brooks is a little bit out of proportion with what he's being criticized for.
Joining us from his hotel room in Los Angeles, our beat writer Darnell Mayberry. And Darnell, you're joining the conversation about the double standard, or apparent double standard, between Doc Rivers, Scott Brooks, and criticism over their coaching in the fourth quarter. We heard it loud on Scott Brooks after Game 4, even some after Game 5. What about Doc Rivers and his management of the Clippers late in Game 5?
Yeah, it wasn't good. It wasn't good at all. And the thing I think is different, first of all, you hit the nail on the head. He has a ring on his finger. The other guy doesn't. That's a huge difference. So you can't ignore that or make light of it. Once you're a championship coach, you get more leeway than guys who haven't won a ring yet. We've seen it before with Eric Spoelstra. Before they won their first championship down in Miami, everyone was questioning Eric Spoelstra. Now that he has 2, he gets a lot more leeway. But I think the other thing is the way that those 2 coaches handle it in the immediate aftermath of the game. Doc Rivers stood up there and took responsibility for his team's struggles. He said they made a comedy of errors. He talked about all the mistakes that they made and how basically it was embarrassing basketball and not the Clippers style of play. Scott Brooks went in there and talked about how he needs to look at it on film and have better answers the next day. So I think the way they approached it immediately after the game made a huge difference in how you perceive the two. The other thing is it was mostly Chris Paul's mistakes. Yes, the Clippers took some questionable shots down the stretch. Their offense really bogged down, just like the Thunders did. They started taking some bad shots. But Chris Paul's 2 turnovers really cost the Clippers. It wasn't really anything Doc Rivers did. He didn't have anything to do with those. Those were on Chris Paul, not Doc Rivers. And the third thing to me is it's happened to Oklahoma City before in the past. This isn't anything new. We've seen the Thunder's offense bog down and really blow leads in the playoffs. Go back to the Western Conference Finals against Dallas. They're up 15 with 5 minutes left. This is nothing new with the Thunder. We've seen it before. I think that's another reason why Scott Brooks gets criticized as much as he does.
All right, Barry, jump in here. I direct 2 questions to you. Number one, does winning a title is that your hall pass? I mean, is that good enough? You can coach questionably and you can just show your ring and criticism be gone.
Yes, and I mean it's almost a made man status, like on The Sopranos, where if a guy's a made man, you really can't do anything with him. I will say this: I did not think that Doc Rivers took any kind of high road in the post game. He did say all those things RFD said he said. He also said they took the game from us, and it was a highway robbery. So I don't know that he was any kind of magnanimous individual at that point. I just think Scott Brooks is a lightning rod. His teams do struggle at times offensively. The truth is the Clippers do it too. I'm not saying Doc Rivers is not a better coach than Scott Brooks. I'm saying Scotty just gets a lot of criticism, and that's going to continue until they win a title. I thought, who was it? Was it RFD just said Eric Spoelstra is an excellent comparison. Spoelstra, remember in that first year, 2011 playoffs and the regular season with the spotlight shining on the Heat all the time. everything they did was a soap opera, and everything they did was, LeBron James ignored Eric Spoelstra. LeBron James isn't paying attention. Spoelstra doesn't have control. And then all of a sudden they win the title in 2012, and everybody, hey, this guy's great. So if Scotty can win a title, most of this criticism goes away.
While we're on the subject of hall passes, let's talk about Chris Paul. Chris Paul's burden shown to us in the post-game press conference, as you point out, Barry, in today's Oklahoman, as we talked about briefly, just disconsolate in the post-game after his performance. But at the same time, the Cliff Paul hall pass that he seems to get on two fronts. One, his in-game contact and the lack of anything resembling a technical foul. Does he have one this series? I can't remember one if he does. Jenny points out he slammed his hand on the scorer's table during the game, game 5. He's really, really outspoken on the court. And also, the fact that his team trails 3-2 and he risks not getting out of the second round again. Does Chris Paul get the Cliff Paul hall pass? Darnell, let's start with you.
Does he get the Cliff Paul hall pass?
Yeah, Cliff Paul, the nice guy, the guy who sells Allstate Insurance, not the bloodthirsty point guard who can't get his team out of the second round.
I don't think he gets a hall pass. I think people are starting to question him more and more, criticize him more and more for not having gotten his team out of the second round at any point in his career. And I think you're starting to see that heat fall on Chris Paul's doorstep. I mean, look at what he did in Game 5. He cost the team the game. He stood up there. He took responsibility for it. But people are putting that loss on Chris Paul. I don't think he gets any kind of hall pass. But the talk of him not making his team good enough to get out of the second round, I think, is ludicrous. He hasn't had much help in his career. He's had some really good players. He's never had a great player until teaming up with Blake Griffin. So I don't think he's getting much of a hall pass at all.
Barry, 3 years he's had Blake Griffin. 3 years. 2 of those years he hadn't been out of the second round. This year he's down 3-2. What about the hall pass?
Oh, I don't know if he gets a hall pass. I think the story of Chris Paul just shows how tough it is to win in the NBA playoffs. I mean, it's tough. The last 2 years, they've played the Grizzlies. Same deal with the Thunder. The Thunder's played the Grizzlies now 3 times, gotten past them twice in Game 7s, and it's just a total terrible assignment. It wrings you out, it wears you out, and maybe you survive it, maybe you don't. Clippers know that very well. I mean, I think Chris Paul is sort of a lovable superstar. A lot of this goes to the age-old NBA myth that it's actually true, but the NBA feeling that little guys generally do get a pass. Big guys, people want to talk about. We like to think about Russell Westbrook getting a lot of criticism, but the truth of the matter is, the king of criticism was on Wilt Chamberlain, who you could argue was the most dominating player ever. But he took a long time to win. He had playoff struggles. It's just tough to win in the playoffs, and that's what Chris Paul is finding out. Heck, it's what the Thunder and Scott Brooks are finding out. They only give out one trophy, and especially in the West, it's tough to advance through the bracket.
Jenny, imagine Kevin Durant going to the playoffs for a 3rd straight year, not advancing out of the second round. What would it be like for him?
Oh my gosh, yeah, and being 29, I mean, Chris Paul's 29, and already there's talk about how the clock is ticking, and Kevin Durant and Russell Westbrook and on the Thunder, how the window is about to close. I mean, didn't Kevin Durant just turn 25? So if you add another 4 years, and imagine that in those last 3 years to get to that age, he doesn't make it out of the second round. I mean, I can't imagine it. I mean, those you guys might be right. Maybe there is no hall pass for Chris Paul, but it sure seems like he's gotten an easier time of it than Kevin Durant. Kevin Durant, the best player at his position. Chris Paul, the best player at his position, and yet nobody's sitting around talking about the window closing on Chris Paul. So I think maybe it's not a hall pass, but there's surely something that's made the criticism a little bit less on Chris Paul. Maybe it's because he plays for the Clippers in LA. Maybe it's that they've not been the team even in their city. I don't know, but there's something that's keeping the criticism from being as sharp as it would be otherwise for a guy that's the best at his position. Darnell, do you have a rebuttal?
Yeah, Cliff Paul, you know the nice guy, the guy who sells Allstate Insurance, not the bloodthirsty point guard who can't get his team out of the second round. What about the hall pass?
Vinny Del Negro.
Nobody says that about Scott Brooks. Nobody says, oh, it's okay for Kevin Durant and Russell Westbrook. It's all about Scott Brooks. So what's the deal?
Scott Brooks is a better coach than Vinny Del Negro.
Darnell running into Scott Brooks' rescue and defense. Thanks, Darnell. Let's move on to the next topic, guys. Serge Ibaka. Is it possible that he is exerting so much energy, effort defending Blake Griffin that he really doesn't have anything left for his usual offensive output? What's happened to Serge Ibaka on offense?
Well, he was great in Game 4 and had 20 points, and he's still not getting a ton of shots, but that's nothing new. I mean, when Serge gets 18 shots in a game, somebody hit me in the head. It's not going to happen when Westbrook and Durant are around. So I do think it's taking stuff out of Serge to guard Blake, no doubt about it. But I still think he's producing. Even in limited minutes the other day, he ended up getting up to 8 points in the second half after going scoreless at halftime because of foul trouble.
It just doesn't seem like the pick and pop game is there as much, Darnell. He had, as Barry points out, he's had a game of near perfect scoring. But in the games that the Thunder's lost, it seems like Serge is maybe not as prolific scoring, and that shot from 18 is not there as much for him.
Yeah, I mean, they're not doing a good job of keeping him involved in the offense, especially late in games. In the last 2 games, he's taken 8 shots or less in each of the games, and so they really have gone away from him even at the start of games now, and that's even more shocking than anything else. I mean, he's done a great job of being efficient and making the most of his shot opportunities when he gets them, but for whatever reason, they're not keeping him involved in the game throughout the game. So they got to get back to that, and that would eliminate the two-man game that we see with Russell Westbrook and Kevin Durant being forced to do so much of it all the time. It's one of the things that's going wrong with this offense. It's not a terrible offense. I'm not trying to make it seem like it is, but it does have its issues, and this is one of them.
Jenny, is Serge just got Blake Griffin on the mind, and is Oklahoma City just fine with that? Is there any chance that the whole game plan is, Serge, you knock yourself out and you try to keep a handle on one of the best offensive talents in the league?
Well, I mean, I think that it is a challenge for Serge, what Blake Griffin can do, what his game has become. I mean, he's obviously expanded his game, extended his game with the range that he has, and that's a challenge. It pulls Serge away from the basket, sort of takes away some of the shot blocking that he's so good at. It has to recover quicker, better than ever to try to, contain guys driving to the basket. But, I agree with Darnell. I think that they really do need to try to look for him more. He's not a guy that can create on his own, so he really is at the mercy of what the ball handlers in that offense do in getting him the ball. He's catching it so much better around the rim, getting him some opportunities down in the paint, I think would be huge. Obviously, getting that mid-range game going again could really help in the spacing issues, some of the problems that we've seen when the offense does bog down. And I think a Western Conference Finals against the Spurs, having Serge a lot more involved in the offense is going to be absolutely key. Now, maybe that changes because the defensive assignment changes. I don't know. But I think that that's going to be really important moving forward, is to reintegrate him,
hey guys,
give him a few more shots.
Hey, guys, look who I found.
Hey, look at that.
We were just getting ready to ask you. Guys, we're talking about the game 6, but I wanted to know before we get away, before I ask your predictions, Barry, Darnell, tell us an LA story. Tell us a story about each other, something that you've picked up on the road, an interesting habit or quirk from one of your coworkers, an interesting situation. Barry, you start.
Oh, boy.
Darnell, AC,
well,
be concerned, be afraid.
Well, their taste in music is just about enough to make me drive into the Pacific Ocean, I can tell you that. The lack of education on AC's part, I mean, I know he wasn't born until about 1990, for crying out loud. but that's a little on the disconcerting side. I did try to educate both of them. I think they were both in the car the other day when I tried to educate them on "You're the reason God made Oklahoma," but they didn't seem to appreciate it. So just how young AC is. That's the thing that gets me. I'm 53 years old, and the age between me and my colleagues keeps growing and growing and growing. So I'm just glad that I did the math the other day. The combined ages of the two of them actually are more than my age, which is good. Here in a couple of years, you'll bring in somebody else, and the combined ages will be younger than me. And someday we'll have a four-man crew, and you'll have three people, all of whom combined ages are younger than me. So I'll say this: SoCal is a young man's territory. So I'm the one out of place out here, not them.
Okay, young fella. Okay, Darnell. Let's hear a story, and if you like, you can even imitate Barry, because I heard a couple of you guys trying to do that on the Thunder Buddies podcast. I think it needs some work. Oh, I don't have your audio, Darnell. We lost your audio. Plug it back in. You back with us? Oh, shoot.
Hear us?
Now I hear you.
Slater's gonna give you one. Hang on.
Barry mentioned terrible taste in music. He's got some terrible taste in music. He said he hasn't listened to a song in the last 30 years. He says there's no good song in the last 30 years. I'm pretty sure everyone on this panel will disagree with him with that statement, right?
I know some songs I like that were made in the last 30 years, yeah.
Hey, when did Bobby McFerrin do "Don't Worry, Be Happy"? Was
Wait
that 30
a
years?
second. That's not going to be our measure, please.
I don't know. If it's within 30 years, then Barry's wrong.
Barry needs to listen to some Eminem, some Lil Wayne. He needs to spice up his life a little bit.
Oh, brother. That ain't happening.
Okay, guys, let's talk about the game. Who you got and what you're looking for tonight? Jenny, you start.
The end of it.
Who are we starting with? Me?
Yeah, we're starting with you.
Sorry, I you cut out there for a second. In tonight's game, golly, I still think the Thunder wins this series, and I called a 7-game series to start with, so I guess I'm going to stick with that. I'll say the Clippers win tonight and the Thunder win Sunday, but I wouldn't be surprised at all to see the Thunder win. As this series has gone on, there's just more evidence that they're the better team. There's more games where you'd say they're the dominant force in that game. I mean, obviously the Clippers win Game 1 convincingly. We're the better team for a vast majority of Game 5, but the rest of the games, the Thunder has been the better team. So, I think that they could do it. You know what? It'd be really good for them to get a little more rest if they would win tonight. They could have a few days to sort of recover and get ready for the Spurs. But I think it's going to go 7. I think Clippers win tonight.
Barry, Game 7 would be 7:30 Sunday night at the Chesapeake Energy Arena. Will there be a Game 7, and why or why not?
Oh, I think there probably will be. I'm going to take the Clippers. Always take the home squad, but although the road team has actually played very well in this series, what is amazing to me is the Clippers shoot very well in Game 5 and lose, shoot very poorly in Game 4 and win. So what we thought was one of the keys to this series, containing the three-point shooting of the Clippers, has actually not been a big deal except for their Game 1 blowout.
Darnell, who you got and who you looking at?
I got the Clippers tonight. This team has withstood adversity all season, and they've done a great job of it. I think that they're going to do it again tonight and force a Game 7. I think this series is going to end in Oklahoma City.
Who's your Thunder? Can you get your Thunder buddy on? Let's hear what Anthony's got, who he's looking at, and who's he picking.
Here we go. Hang on.
We doing prediction time?
Prediction time.
I'm going Clippers too. I agree with Darnell. I was just at their shoot around. They look like they've recovered a little bit, at least mentally. And Jamal Crawford kind of referred to tonight as it's like a state tournament game. He said, and a lot of us have won state tournaments, including him. So I think Jamal Crawford's going to have his best game of the series because, I mean, we've been waiting for a big one from him, and I'm thinking he's going to have a nice game. I'm picking the Clippers, and I picked the Thunder in 7 before the series, so I'll go with that too.
Okay, guys, the Big House moves to the Staples Center for the big state tournament game tonight, Game 6, Thunder Clippers on TNT. That's all for this edition of Thunder Thursdays, but you can stay with the best coverage team anywhere. Every day 8 News OK, and every morning in the Oklahoman.